give another public lecture here at Chayanot as well. But today he is here with absolutely new content. Before going into that, I'd like to remind you about one of our very important upcoming events that is coming on November 15th. The announcements of that event is yet to be public, but since you are here, November 15th there will be a small symposium, half a day, at Krishi Vidhi Institution, and Balakrishna Doshi and Juhani Palazna will give a talk there, and there will be a conversation. So by default you all are invited there, and it is a free event, anybody can come there. There may be some sort of registration process which you will be notified through our social media channels and email. Subscribe to our outgoing email from our website. I'd now like to invite Meina Tabassum here to introduce our speaker today.
Well, a very warm welcome to all of you today. We have Peter Buchanan. Some of you might have known him because he was here in our Bengal Architecture Symposium in April. And he has given a few talks. So for Peter, this is second time in Dhaka. So welcome, Peter, and welcome you all. So some of you already know about him, but even then, those who don't, I would like to speak a little bit about all the things that he has done. Peter has done so many things, actually. He is an architect, an urban designer, he is a writer, a critic, a curator, an academic. So, you name it, he has it in his portfolio. So Peter was born and brought up in South Africa, and he studied there, and his early career was there as an architect and an urban designer. Later on, he worked with the Architects Journal and the Architecture Review, two very well-known and established journals in architecture, and where in Architecture Review he also was the deputy editor. Later on, he became a freelance, and as a freelance, he has worked also as a consultant for urban design consultant, and he has actually done quite a bit of what Qazi Khalid Ashraf calls him as a prolific writer, and so he has really published numerously in many journals and books. Would not be fair for me to just stand here and give you the list, but most importantly, he has done a few things that I think it needs to be mentioned. He has curated two major exhibitions. One is the exhibition of Renzo Piano Building Workshop, a traveling exhibition, which later on turned into 5 volumes of books that's done by him. And also from the Architecture League of New York, he curated the exhibition 10 Shades of Green. Was it green or gray? Green. Okay, so basically, but most importantly, I think what I find Peter's, of all the essays that he has done, the most important for me is the Big Rethinking. The Big Rethinking is a sort of an effort that was brought out by the Architecture Review, a year-long campaign on essays and events, and Peter wrote monthly on the Big Rethinking. And this was in the end of 2011, and at that time, I think it was right after the financial meltdown, and we know the crisis of the economic and the environmental crisis that the world was going through. And he basically suggests, rethinking or re-evaluating the position of architecture profession, in also how we should rethink architecture itself and the goal of architects. So not to say too much anymore, I would request Peter to be on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, for that. This talk is a public talk, but it's part of a workshop on urban design, and hence the choice of the subject. And so some of the things I would say are probably aimed as much at the class as the audience. Yeah, thanks. They're provocations and inspirations to think about things that are relevant that we're talking about. And just while I remember, tomorrow we're meeting again. These are comments addressed only at the class. And when I went home last night, it occurred to me that there's something I don't understand about Bangladesh, which would be important that you think about overnight and bring some ideas to the class tomorrow, which is what constitutes a good housing typology for the small towns and villages. Because almost everywhere, and I've worked as an urban designer, for instance, all around the world in all kinds of places, and I always kind of knew how to do work that was rooted in tradition, would feel that, and would feel like good housing appropriate to that particular town. And I realized, thinking last night when I got home about the little town we're working in, I have no idea what you'd consider to be good and appropriate and satisfying. In fact, when I was thinking about our conversation, it realized that what people seemed to like about the little towns was more the lifestyle than the particular environment. I might be wrong, but this is something to talk about tomorrow. We'll get on to tonight's talk. I have used a lot of text slides to begin with. That's simply because I lecture all over the place. I'm very often jet-lagged, tired, and if I don't have something to remind me what the hell I'm talking about, I can just forget. It once happened to me in America in the middle of the lecture. I couldn't even remember where I was. So that's the first. Water is an obvious theme to talk about in Bangladesh. It's everywhere. It's threatening. In a city like Dhaka, you get the feeling that it's not respected, it's not made use of, and so that's what and I'll conclude with a few comments, perhaps somewhat flippant, about forests, because, of course, Bangladesh was once a very forested country, of which apparently 3% only of the original forest remains. This is normal in a highly, in a very densely populated agricultural country. Obviously, we need the land for food and so on. We cut down the trees. But we're certainly going through, and this lies behind this talk, we're going through a profound change in the way we think about our relation to nature and everything. And in Bangladesh, I can recognize that you're obsessed with just current issues. I mean, God, even just getting to work and getting home again is a problem here. Well, in the rest of the world, we're very profoundly aware of the fact that we're going through one of the big shifts in history. Not only is 400 years of modernity over, but maybe the epoch that started with the rise of the cities, the epoch which is driven by the need to conquer nature, which was seen as something other than us, has led us into a very disastrous relationship where, we have this crisis of sustainability. Many of those problems stem right back, the ideas, to when we founded cities, but all of these things got emphasized immensely during the modern era, which tended to treat things as simply resources to be used. I mean, when you look at Dhaka, you think this could be a beautiful city with all those lakes and so on. Imagine them being landscaped. Imagine a green chain of beautifully landscaped lakes, instead of which lakes seem to be here for dumping rubbish in, and you're filling them in. That is going to cost this country dearly in the long run, I think, because what lies behind this talk and the workshop is how does Bangladesh move from a sweatshop economy to a new economy. And the prime determinant of attracting highly skilled people, of industries and investment that want highly skilled, is actually quality of life. And Dhaka is destroying its quality of life. You know, those things which could provide wonderful leisure resources are being destroyed. And that's something definitely you regret. Let me just see what other points I was going to... yeah. So, one of the big themes in the world is to rewild the world. This may sound crazy to Bangladeshis, but in England, they're already introduced animals that have been extinct for a long time. The beavers, they're talking about introducing wolves again, bears again, and all kinds of wild animals. The other thing, of course, which is a concept, and it will affect this talk, particularly as I conclude, is that the countryside has become inhospitable to wildlife. It's so full of chemicals and so on that wildlife is actually moving into the cities. There's a greater diversity of wildlife in Europe and North America in many of the cities than there is in the countryside. In fact, the UK government issued guidelines as to how to make your gardens and so on more hospitable to wildlife, recognizing that it was being driven out of the countryside. Also, this is a high-stress city. I mean, to spend your life sitting in traffic jams, you know, without much release, is not the way to live a life. There are various ways you can, I mean, in London people work hard, but then afterwards they go and exercise. They run, they swim, and so on. And all of these things help you cope with stress and keep you fit and drain your energy. I would say if Dhaka is going to move to the next kind of stage in economy, it's got to think about these issues. There is, coming out of America actually, the research is abundant evidence that being close to greenery and nature lowers crimes, it lowers mental health problems and so on. So these are important issues. Now, water in this country, I recognize, is a major engineering problem. I'm not going to talk about engineering or ecological things. This talk is very much addressed to cultural and psychological issues, which I think are as important that we address them as the technical issues. One of the reasons we made so little progress in sustainability is that we're treating it as an objective technical issue. I didn't actually design it, but when I left the university, I worked on a low energy building already in 1968. We knew how to do that already, but it's still not a prevalent thing. So how do we, the resistance comes from our attitudes in our culture. Just let's see if there are any other points. For instance, why has California taken off as such a rich part of the world? It doesn't have the natural resources. During the 19th and early 20th century, it was assumed that you located where there were natural resources, iron ore, coal, and kind of things like that. But what happened in California is that those people who are highly skilled, aerospace engineers, scientists, and so on, just said, we're going to California. If you want us, come and join us. This was recognized very much in the 80s, that to attract high-tech business, you had to improve the quality of life, the character of your city. Barcelona set an example, which has been followed by cities all around the world, upgrading the quality of life, and also the character of the city. The other comment I was going to make is that in cities in the developing world, like Dhaka, people are coming in to make money, and basically there's a whole lot of people are sacrificing their lives for the future generation. They are living a very tough life so that they can give a better life for their kids and their nephews and their nieces. So in many ways the problems, urban problems of the developing world are not to cope with the present. Things might be tough, but people accept that. There's a kind of, but it's that the next generation is going to have very much higher expectations, which are not being satisfied. And we're not going to get to sustainability till there are more people who feel quite happy with their lives. When you got a dissatisfied population, you have an unstable population. Now, to tackle the major problem, which I see in Dhaka, which is how you get around the city, that's kind of intractable almost. You have this problem that everything runs up and down the same road, which is pinched by military things. That's going to cost a fortune to sort out. But if you up the quality of life, you'd get the money to sort that out. And often as an urban designer, you're looking for small things that will have huge knock-on effects. And that's what I'm interested here, and it's interested in the class that we're teaching. So what Barcelona understood, for instance, was that it had to improve its image and the quality of life in order to be a successful city. Now, there are two ways we can cope with the situation, and they're complementary, they're not contradictory. One is to improve Dhaka, in which case I would say the cheap way, and we'll talk about how these things can be done cheap, would be to look at the landscape that you are destroying, which is the waterscapes and the lakes. The other thing is to upgrade the town, and this is what happened to London after the Second World War, is that they built new towns around London. Here you have existing towns which can be upgraded, and as those, they take pressure off Dhaka, which will then be able to, firstly, they set an example, which maybe Dhaka will be shamed into following, and they take the pressure off to allow regeneration. London was about 8.5 million at the end of the Second World War. It declined as part of policy of moving businesses out to as low as 5 million, but that allowed it to restructure in a very interesting way, and that's why London is such a great city at the moment. In fact, its problem now is it's so desirable it's become unaffordable. As I said, we're going through massive change, which doesn't seem to be an issue that people are particularly conscious of because your immediate issues are so much. But nevertheless, we'll be addressing this because we're at a time of seeing things in a very big temporal frame and basically reassessing the purposes of everything. Not just going back to the beginnings of the cities 8,000 years ago, but going back even further. Yeah, modernity is over as far as I'm concerned. That's not even something I can argue, we can talk about later. And unsustainability is endemic to modernity. It is right at the core of modern thinking. The modern thinking, I mean, one of its characteristics was to look at one issue at a time, and all the problems were just addressed. They were even called externalities. This happens in modern medicine and modern agriculture, modern industry, and those externalities are now what are biting us. You know, that's the cause of many of our major intractable problems. So one of the big projects of our time is to reconnect with the natural world, but also with who we are and who we could be, which also lies at the heart of this talk. We're talking about the changing relationship with water, and now our relationship with water is actually much more intimate and complex than many people appreciate, and that's why I will say make a few comments right at the beginning. We're mostly made of water. Like all life forms, we evolved from water, but unlike other land mammals, most of them, the case can be made, this is a controversial point, but that we actually spent at least part of our time when we went back to the water. So this is how we evolved from the natural, actually, is this on? Okay. Of course, between, sorry. Between here and here, there's a whole lot of interim steps, but the point was that, like all life, we came out of the water, and that relationship with water continues to be a fundamental part of our culture, human culture. It was more complex. These are issues that are kind of live in my mind, what I'm going through now, that actually we evolved through several steps before we became fully human. We went through many stages of what they called hominins, And when we became fully mankind, we coexisted with 6 different hominids. Most of us actually have, for instance, most Europeans have Neanderthal blood. All of us are contaminated actually with other species other than pure Homo sapiens, and that's quite an interesting thing, which we won't. But humans are kind of peculiar in a relation to nature. For instance, little babies have no fear of water. They take to water just like aquatic animals. For instance, I don't know if you know that we humans, these are obviously humans who practice this thing, we can dive deeper than a seal. And, well, the seal is practicing it every day, all of them. We have a natural affinity with water. When we are put in water, we have flaps in our nose that close the nose to water. Other mammals don't have that. Unlike other mammals, which when they're in water, the heart rate goes up, the breathing rate goes up. With us, it goes down. Water perhaps partly explains the fact that we have no hair. Now, as I say, this was a theory proposed in the 60s by some biologists, was kind of rejected, but has been gathering momentum. There was a big conference in London about 2 years ago where biologists and so on from around the world came together, and they still don't take it entirely seriously, but they do take aspects of it seriously. They say the fact that we're bipedal and got on back legs and got very good balance probably means that we at least spent time wading in water. That, it seems that most scientists are prepared to accept. I love controversial theories. I'll come out with some more, no doubt. But these are some of the reasons why people think we were. For instance, our brain chemistry is much closer to that of a dolphin than to any other animal. Even it's different to bonobos, which are the closest animal we resemble. The bodily hair, the subcutaneous fat, which again is and the fact also that our legs stretch down from the pelvis is something that only bonobos are somewhat like us. So water certainly has been really, really important in our culture. And the fact that we are erect makes us very different to other animals, because in other animals, they lead with their nose and their eyes, but all the most vulnerable parts of their body, their viscera and everything, are actually all well protected. We are incredibly vulnerable. And this is really important to understand architecture, because if you go to if you look at what goes on in the architectural schools in Britain and the east coast of America, for instance, you realize that this has actually been forgotten. We stand erect, we look at certain things, we have a stance which is reflected in classical architecture. We're also rhythmic. We have a particular rhythm which comes from our walking, and I think this is reflected in classical architecture, as well as we're polyrhythmic in our breathing. So for instance, these are pictures taken from the Bartlett. And I was joking, I gave a lecture to these students. I said, you know, you come down for space, what kind of creature lives in these things? You know, here you can imagine you're some sort of big insect. Here you're some kind of sea slug. But somebody from Mars would never think that these are these characters standing erect with human characteristics. When you look at a building like this, there's so many levels at which you can project the human into the columnation, the rhythmic things of the baluster. I'm not saying that we copy this again. I think that we have to recognize, and this is what the Big Rethink was, is that architecture has got lost. There's certainly good architecture being produced, but there is a wide state of confusion. For instance, I find not many architects can tell good from bad. And the confusion certainly, I think, is more prevalent in academia than architecture. And it's not only classical architecture. What I've been talking about, the rhythmic organization and so on, those things which relate to our stance, which comes from being in water, are reflected in other kinds of architecture. The dome also reflects architecture. I mean, Jung, for instance, the great psychologist, talked about the space above us as being where we project our aspirations and spiritual things. It's no one. The more, don't have time here to go into it, but the more you think about the psychology of humans as well as the physicality of the human, you realize that traditional architectures recognized these qualities, which are denied not by most modern architects, but certainly by a lot of the projects you see in architectural schools. Now, just to put things into perspective, people argue about how long we were tribal peoples, whether it's 150,000 years, 200,000 years, but the point is that the time since we lived like that to now is, in historical time, just a blink of the eye. For most of our lives, we lived a life in which the world provided for us. When I was a student in the 60s, I remember reading the book by Marshall Shalin's Stone Age Economics. And what's really interesting is that in the Amazon here, these people fed themselves with only a few minutes a day, going out to look for food. And then they went hunting, not only for food, as much for sports. Even those people who were pushed out to the most difficult parts of the world to live in, like the Kalahari Desert, the San Bushmen, they satisfy most of their needs. It would take a maximum of 2 hours to feed themselves. Now, somehow, with all our labor-saving gadgets and so on, here we are working harder and harder and harder than ever. And, you know, what is the quality of life? Did we go through millions of years of evolution to sit in a traffic jam? It doesn't make sense. Also, many of these cultures spent a lot of the time in the water, the Amazonian, and in fact, there are some human types who are actually no longer, for various horrible reasons, no longer with us. But the most advanced human skeletons and some that have been studied were actually semi-aquatic. They lived on the seashore and spent a lot of time in the sea. Now, the thing about culture and relationship to culture, I was very struck that, you know, jumping from the Amazons, this is Bangladesh, as you recognize, and the ponds that are everywhere in the countryside. Here's somebody looking from his house down at the pond and the things that are important in life. What I liked very much also is how the gut is a very simple device, but it dignifies. It provides a communal focus, and it dignifies the daily act of swimming. As we were driving through this area, there were people walking down the roads and so on. Everybody was going for their swim. It obviously was a really major part of daily life, which it's not in the cities. Here's the gut and so on. So, once we developed cities and towns, obviously water was a major determinant of where they're located. So many cities are at crossings of rivers, quite obviously, because that's where people gather and cross. You get the density. And also the first civilizations were riverine cultures: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Ganges plain culture, and the culture of China and of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. People keep changing their minds as to which are the oldest. The last thing I read was saying that Bangladesh might, the culture of the Ganges plains might be the oldest, actually older than Mesopotamia, which is certainly older than Egypt. So this riverine culture is very, very important to our culture and to who we are. And it's obvious that cities are in natural ports by the sea, obviously, and also that some settlements are on islands. This is just a picture of you can see that people used to cross here, and they're now crossing the bridge, and hence the location of this picturesque village on the Darent River. I have another reason for including this. That's what it looked like. And this is on that river. And what intrigues me about this river, I went down, walked along it with a friend who's a medical researcher, and we swam in various parts, is that we saw all these old people who have a really low-stress, lovely life. And then we went into the churchyard, and we looked at the graves, and the people here, 97, 102, 98, 101, there were some people who died of cancer in their 60s or something, but a very high quality lifestyle, low stress, and so much of what makes this a beautiful lifestyle, its relationship to water, does have profound health consequences. I'm not sure what longevity is in Dhaka. I would say that if it's quite high, it has to do with the importance of family relationships, because the number one thing they now find as a causal factor in disease is actually loneliness. There's a German city in which 80% of the houses are single occupancy, one person. I saw medical research saying you could drink 2 bottles of wine, you could smoke 2 packets of cigarettes and all these things, and it's not as bad for you as living alone, however. These are just other examples of cities located where they are because of the relationship. London was founded, it was actually there before the Romans got there, but it developed because that was a place, the first place you could cross the Thames. It was also then a good place to have a harbour. London, of course, was the biggest port in the world for probably about 200 years. And this is where the Romans built their first bridge, and then later the medieval bridge, and there's London Bridge still. And still you can see that's the centre of Roman London. And this is where all this hung out, all the theatre people and so on, all the people are having fun. Of course, this is how to build the bridge. You know, in the modern age, we made things functional. This was the thing. We solved one problem at a time. This is a key thing in modernity. Have a problem, and this is how you trained in architecture. Architecture is problem solving. We don't have time to go, but that's a very impoverished notion of what architecture is about. I've written extensively about this. But these are real bridges. Isfahan, Florence, and so on. Again, these are bridges concerned with the quality of life in the city, not just how, and of course, Venice, one of the great cities, was there for defensive reasons. Now, water and its role in culture. You see that, for instance, in Roman times, that the bath was the major collective focus, that and the forum. But you spent hours a day in the bathhouse, and you not only went there to bath, but you did you transacted business. Today, you might go and say, you know, meet me in Starbucks, and that's where you'll talk business. But here it used to be in the bathhouse. These are the baths of Caracalla. This is a Roman bath still in use in London, in Bath, as it's called, in West England. Some of these pictures are slightly blurry because I downloaded them from the internet. The other thing, though, of course, is that as these cities grew, even if they were located with water, as they got bigger, how to get the water became a major problem. So the Romans, great engineers, built these aqueducts which run for miles. And I show these partly because these are engineering structures, but they're also, I think, amongst the greatest works that I know. They really move me. And in Islamic culture, they picked up many of the traditions, as you know, of Roman culture, the courtyard house and so on, but also the bathhouse became the hammam, which was very important. I've traveled a lot in these parts of the world, and these are not the most beautiful hammams. The most beautiful ones I've seen, which unfortunately I have on 35mm slides, which I couldn't find to digitize, are much more beautiful than these kind of fancy ones. This one, it's supposed to be from the Moorish times in Andalusia, but it looks a bit iffy to me, actually. It's certainly been considerably glamorized since then, but still, they are beautiful buildings, and it does show the importance of water in the culture. Water is not just something where you wash yourself and things that you drink. It is central to the culture. This is another hammam, but I just think these are beautiful buildings, and I've visited many, many parts of the world. Do you have hammams here or not? No, that's interesting. Because they're so much part of Islamic culture. These are more, I just think these are all stupendous buildings. This is obviously a Persian one on the right. And the water, how the water gets there in desert countries is really, really interesting. This is in the desert. These are khanats. In the Persian desert, Iranian desert, you see these holes everywhere. And you wonder what they're for. And what they're doing is that those are the breathing holes for underground channels which take the water from the mountains out to towns or farms and so on. Incredible pieces of engineering. One of the things that's, in the days of a traditional society, you had the equivalent, you had the landlords and so on, is that if you lived on the landlord's land, one of the things you had to do is give so many days a year to keeping the khanats clean. The khanats even have their own fish, which, because it's dark down there, they're blind. And that's another part where you see rows and rows of khanats. And this is typical where you're in the desert and the khanat comes out and the landlord's house. I find these things incredibly beautiful. I did a lot of urban design work in the 70s, just before the mullahs took over, and it was really a beautiful place. I'm not saying that there's real problems with the Shah's regime, but you'd drive up to a place like this, and the landlord would invite you up, and you'd sit here with the cool breezes, and you're always offered a pipe of opium. That was part of Iranian culture, and his favorite musician would play for you, or somebody would recite poetry. It's a rather beautiful culture, I think. And again, that our relation to water was so precious that this incredible effort to bring it out into the desert, where these would have been wheat fields on the side, where it was more than just irrigated the wheat fields. The other thing is that in many cultures, that as you came into the country, you were welcomed by a fountain. This is from the Alhambra. And the fountain has a number of things. You come in from the heat, and it keeps the place cool. You can feel the evaporation, and also the sound of the water. For me, these ones from much of the Islamic world are beautiful because they're actually very quiet and gentle fountains. And I like this. The house says hello to you, and water is a sacred thing. It offers you the water to wash your hands, to drink, and so on. And this is very different than just switching on a tap. It's like, sitting around a fire in a fireplace is very different to just switching on the central heating. And one of the consequences of modernity is that things have lost their spiritual meaning. They've lost their deep social meanings. And this is very much one of the things that we're trying to recover. In Mexico, for instance, when you come into a hacienda, again, the Spanish culture is heavily influenced by Moorish culture. There's always the fountain to cool the place, but also to provide this symbolic and real sense of welcome. Another one in a Mexican hacienda. And of course, many of the great civic and celebratory spaces in the city are fountains. Water is hugely important on many, many levels. These, for me, are some of the most beautiful structures. And the stepped wells of India, they're functional, but they are wonderfully powerful architecture. I mean, they're like temples to water. The only thing, I feel sorry for the people climbing up and down their stairs. But so these are just some stepped wells. There you see the poor women climbing up and down. So modernity is the mindset underpinning. It may have come from Europe, but it underpins the whole of globalized society. It's what's coming to an end. It's what's got us into. It provided incredible benefits, no doubt about it, in healthcare, technology, and so on. But it had the downsides, which are becoming really problematic. So it starts with the Renaissance. The central idea, was that the rediscovery of reason. So faith gives way to reason, and science takes off. The central idea of science is that there is an objective reality that can be studied, measured, analyzed, external to us. From that, the world fragments into a world of objects, objectivity and object, which is the world that we live in. And a world of a very diminished, I've written about this extended, I don't have to go, a world of a very diminished reality, a reality concerned, well, with being realistic. The fantasy world, which you see in the examples that we've been looking at in relation to water, is gone. So it's suppressed as well as emphasizing objective and memory, it suppressed the sensual, the spiritual, and also the way of our knowledge, which is terrific, that was produced by modernity, is impoverished in terms of playing down the manifold interconnections that we have between each other and the world. I mean, this is really, really striking as we're starting to recover this. And if you go to a doctor, they will be looking at the one symptom and so on. So a lot of people won't go to that. They might work on a Skype with somebody thousands of miles away who can read them energetically, and you can feel parts of your body being repositioned as you work. Now that is an idea that modernity can't cope with, but it is a lived reality of many people. Reality itself is changing very quickly and profoundly. The beginnings of modernity and beginnings of course, engineering, which is the world that we live in now, were great feats. London had terrible problems of sewage and so on, and so there were the great feats of building the sewage system, the underground system, and so on. And of course, even the openings of these places were recognized. These were modern feats. But part of it also was London had many rivers, which actually got buried in the sewers to carry all sewage away. One of the ways in which I propose that we celebrate the millennium in England, in London, is to actually open up the rivers again, because we don't need them as sewers, and let them be part of the landscape. So as I said, modernity brought many gifts, its toxic legacy. One of the problems is that it is really a problem in relation to water. The next world war, most people would predict, if it's going to be, will be about water. 97.5% of the water we have is salt, and of the little bit of water that's left, 2/3 of that is actually locked up in ice caps and in snow. So water is actually very, very precious. But that water that we have is contaminated with so many things. In the EU directives and so on, they tell you purity of water, the concentration of bacteria and so on. And London water meets all those kinds of things. They don't tell you to measure lots of other things which are really scary. And the water of every big city is full of painkillers. It's full of birth control pills, which is why we have fertility problems and all these kinds of things. It's full of antibiotics, major health consequences. It's full of heavy metals, which are a factor in a huge range of diseases. And this is all to do with the fact that modernity only looked at one thing at a time. It never looked at all the impacts of things, and something that you've got to get out of. And one of the areas where we see the negative impacts of modernity very profoundly is in relation to water. Also, modern farming, farming is the biggest use of water, even bigger than industry. We're running down all the underground wells all around the world. We're also, as a consequence of that, pulling up all kinds of heavy metals, which have settled down and are not good for our systems. And the water is heavily contaminated with fertilizers, with all kinds of horrible things, and the slurry from animals. We actually have made a hell of a mess. And that's what we've got to sort out and get out of. I'm not going to really address this, because part of my argument is that to deal with these really difficult, intractable issues, we've just got to learn to have more fun. If we enjoyed the world more and connected with it more, we might start to be more responsible for it. That's a very simplified vision. But so we have to maintain the benefits of modernity, which are profound and immense, but also regenerate the damage that it's done to the natural world and the man-made world. Part of that is redefining our sense of reality, and actually what is the good life. This is the workshop we're doing. There's been a lot of talk about quality of life and what constitutes the good life, and what it is to expand into full humanity. I mean, did we really evolve to sit in traffic jams, to work? No, we are vast. We're capable of vastly more than that. You know, just think of the time that robs you of, that could be spent with family, with cultural pursuits, with leisure pursuits. So the role of the city, along with that of education, culture, and much else, we're beginning to see not in terms of being a place of just manufacture, making things, a place of production, but returning to its original role, which is the place in which we created ourselves. It's the crucible of culture, of consciousness, of creativity, and of one of the fundamental things in any urban design is try to design a city that's going to expand its inhabitants, offer them many kinds of experiences, things to do, so that they become more fully who they could be. The question I very often ask students is, you know, imagine living in that and lying on your deathbed. Would you feel that you'd lived a full life, where you'd fulfilled who you could be and connected to everybody? I think that's a key question. It's actually amazing how quickly you can access that kind of information. You can look at a plan and so on and ask yourself that question. You get amazing answers. Now, just to show a city that contrasts with Dhaka, this is a typical summer evening in London, and we're only looking in relation to water, of which this is the tiniest percentage. This is not even 0.1% of the things you can do with water in London on a warm evening or any other evening. I mean, London has certainly many hundreds of places you can swim and play in and so on, probably many thousands. This is people waiting to go into a concert in the Barbican. Here the water is purely decorative, but you see the importance of water. This is, I live near Hampstead Heath. This is one of there are 3 ponds on Hampstead Heath where people can swim, and on any warm evening they're crowded. They're dams, they're natural ponds. This is the Hyde Park, Serpentine on the evening, and people playing in pedalos. This is the Princess Diana fountain. As you can see how popular it is. And it's actually quite interesting because it's designed to mimic the things of water. So the kinds of ripples and cascades and little waterfalls and so on that you get in a natural river are reproduced. And the place is always buzzing with kids and adults playing around. These are people just enjoying themselves. When I think back in my childhood, many of my happiest days were actually sliding down rocks which had water over them. You know, it goes 200 meters down and, you know, crash over a waterfall. Or we used to build dams and then demolish them and get carried down the river on the dam that we'd built. These are things which are probably not available in your lives, but seems to me to be their fundamental. Yeah, this is just an ornamental pond in a museum in London, but it's always full of kids playing around. There it is again. This is Richmond, which is West London, and actually it can often be much busier than this, but people just gather and picnic, eat and drink, looking at the river. And of course you can hire boats and go up and down. These are some of the boats that people use. There's always kayaks on the river. There's always people paddleboarding. So now, some examples of things that people can do. These are floating swimming pools. So that one is a project. Actually, I think both of these are projects, and no, that's a real one. Despite the huge number of places to swim in London, there has become a movement to build floating swimming pools. Now, you could do that in any of the lakes in Dhaka. They are designed to be much more interesting than just a swimming pool. And the point about this is that the ones that have been built in London are actually being started by young architects who are setting up their own practice. And this is the way to set up a practice. You decide you want to build something, you design the thing, you then put it on the internet, and it gets crowdfunded. The first one got all the money it needed in 2 months, what they did is that according to how much money you paid, so you were a member. If it was £50, you were a member for a year. If it's £500, you're a lifetime member, you could use these things. The last one they did, number 8, they crowdfunded in a weekend. Now, there's no reason why young architects here who want to set up their practice can't actually make lots of proposals for things that would improve the quality of life in Dhaka and just fund it on the internet. And if it's in the water and so on, you're not even part of municipal land. All kinds of ways you can get around the authorities. This is another thing which has become prevalent, is that part of the chemicals that are spoiling our health is that every cell in the body has an iodine receptor. But we use a lot of the same class of chemicals, what's known as halides, for things like chlorine to decontaminate water, fluorine for our teeth and so on. And those have actually taken up the positions where the iodine should be in our body, and it's causing major health problems. So how to use just plants, sometimes, you know, snails and fish and so on, to purify water. And lots of the new swimming pools are being built so that they're completely chemical free using natural processes. These are just a few examples. And for instance, if you got an expert, they could actually plant the right things around your lakes here and quite quickly decontaminate them. What's amazing about these things is how quickly they work. So these are some inspiring recent uses of water. I've chosen examples all from very hot climates because that seemed to be appropriate. And this is the first one. This is a friend of mine, Emilio Ambas. This was an unbuilt project. And he was asked to do a plaza in Houston. And he said, well, in the heat of Houston, what do you want? You want shade and greenery and cooling mists. So these have got wire frames and they've got creepers growing on them, and they have little nozzles spraying water, so it's very cool. And then you can go inside these, and I'm not sure. Yeah. So it starts at pavement level and just dishes down like this, and they get bigger and bigger, and you can get inside. And the idea is this should look like a cooling block of ice melting, and you can walk in, and then inside are these cascading waterfalls, the mists of which come up, and in the evening lasers and so on play on them. For me, the problem is that after this actually rather powerfully evocative thing, it's just a shopping centre in the middle, but still, I think it's actually quite a fun project. Unfortunately, this one didn't get off the ground. This one did get off the ground. This is Singapore. It's Moshi Safdie, a crazy hotel which I stayed in. And this big banana is a huge swimming pool. Now, I stayed there because I was talking at a conference, and being jet lagged and so on, like many people, I found I actually wasn't sleeping very much. So this is a swimming pool, and it closed at 11:30 at night and would open at 5:30 the next morning, and I was always there at 11:30 at night, and then I would go and sleep quickly and be back and watch the sunrise. It's wonderful to be up in the sky swimming and watch the sun going. We can build fantastic experiences today. That's it at dawn. I was not the only person doing that, swimming till you know, it was closed at 11:30 and being up with the sun. Sorry, am I lights causing trouble here? This is one which I want to show because I think it's germane to the water's edges in Bangladesh and in Dhaka in particular. It's called the South Bank in Brisbane, that's central Brisbane. This is the river in Brisbane, which for various reasons they didn't find particularly usable. So the South Bank, this is the center of Brisbane, this is the South Bank, and this is a very beautiful park. And they are designed so that they work together as a kind of triangle. They've pedestrianized this main street, which I don't really know why, but I didn't take any pictures of it because it's actually very, very well done, with a whole lot of restaurants and so on in the middle. But I'm going to show you pictures of this area here. This had been industry and docks, and So it was right close to the center, major opportunities to do something. They originally had a trade fair there, and then it actually became a very diverse cultural leisure center. Up here are things like art museums and library. Down here are things like theaters and concert halls. And then you'll see what it becomes like as we go down here. They've got universities attached to it, a lot of housing in this area, and lots of restaurants. So it's buzzing 24 hours a day. What's also nice about it is it's designed for everybody. So it's something where rich and poor, everybody meets. What was striking when I went there, I was taking to lunch at the restaurant here, and I had my computer and my camera, both of which were open, and they were on the back seat of the car. So we went into the restaurant, and I said to the guy, hang on, shouldn't we lock these up? He said, are you crazy? He said, this is Brisbane. People are happy here. They don't steal things. That's an interesting reflection on the city. So that's the original plan of developing it. And we're going to start at this end quickly. So here's the bridge from the Botanical Gardens. That's the restaurant where I ate. These are housing, which is part of it. And what's nice about it is that there are several paths of walking along the edge of the river. And there's several different ways of using the water. They don't actually use the water because it's dirty. They're actually not crocodiles in this part. They're on other parts of it. And all the water is handled within this, within the park, what they call the South Bank. So there's kind of the beginnings of the water. And here you can see there's a walkway further down, and then this, and connecting by fountains. And this is, again, the kind of restaurants overlooking water, more water. This is as you can see, it's the same climate as here. It's a hot place. And then what they have is that they've created, because the water here can be purified, a beach with clean water, and people swim there. It's actually better than it looks in these pictures. And even at midnight, there are people swimming in this pool. It's a huge resource for the city. There you can see. This is, yeah, we're looking from the water's edge back to where there's shopping and restaurant streets. This is a very clever device, because one of the problems with urban designers is that you can design a very nice streetscape, the public realm, but you know that the architects are going to make a mess of it by putting lousy buildings along. So this is part of the urban design of the city, are these tall pergolas, which then provide shade, but also hide the buildings. The buildings, any kind of rubbish can come and go behind that, but it's still a very nice street. You know, when I look at places in Dhaka, I think, why don't they do that? The thing about Dhaka is you've got these fancy buildings, and they rise from chaos. Wouldn't it be nice to walk along underneath pergolas and so on, and then the buildings would have some... The only thing is that, I guess, in this city, you'd pack it full of cables, all these cables that are everywhere. Oh. And this is a pergola, another, which is between what we saw on the river. But it's obviously derived from Enrique Miralles, but it works a million times better than the ones by Enrique Miralles. And off that, this is an open-air concert hall. Because it rains there, it has got a roof, but otherwise, and I think the roof was also to stop the noise disrupting the residential parts. There are all kinds of facilities. I only showed a few. There's a very good university, which is part of this development. And then this is the theatre coming up. These, you can see, were designed in the 70s. They're kind of typical 70s, American 70s architecture, but quite good of its type. And then also, these are the art galleries. As well as the river and the waterways, there is a theme of water running through the buildings. So there are many kinds of pathways through the buildings, through the development, and also many kinds of water features. So there we're going into the museum, and you can see the water, which is like this. And then once you go in, it's spraying and cooling the air. And you go through, and the water is right in the center of the halls, and again between the buildings. This is, I think, something that we can learn from anywhere in Dhaka and Bangladesh is that more imaginative use can be made of water. There's other things to do with lakes and put your rubbish in it and fill them up. I mean, people are going to regret that terribly. And here we go on, and there's an art museum on the left. Yeah, you can see the quality of the lands. And I think there's a big archive. And this is the State Library. Pictures of the State Library and a bridge back to the town. Said, actually, you know, I showed you the old bridges and that they're pleasant. For me, this bridge is just completely preposterous. It's a sort of exhibit of stupid engineering. It's completely unnecessary. But that's the modern age. Yeah, I've talked about these. Let's talk. It's not only water, but as I said, Bangladesh was forested, and this is a little bit which comes off a lecture I was asked to do in New York and then didn't happen, that as well as reintroduce the water, we have to reintroduce the forest. One of the students was talking about this in the workshop yesterday, and I agree with them absolutely. I actually think a great city should have a forest in the middle of it. And, you know, imagine that, I mean, one of the terrible things here is the big parks you can't get into. You know, the one around the Parliament building and around the Prime Minister's house. They should be public spaces, but I would get a big one and make it into a forest, because many of my most magical experiences were in forests. You know, to sit with a camp around a fire in a forest, to sleep in a tree in a forest, to sleep 30, 40 meters up in the sky, especially when it rains and the tree is shaking and you're under a tarpaulin and dry. So, you know, imagine if in Dhaka you had a forest and you had spotted deer, you had monkeys, maybe a few cobras. They're perfectly okay, they're tame. And I just think that that would add a huge dimension. This lecture was aimed at, but these are taken from a lecture in New York. And I was going to ask the audience, who of you have fallen out of a tree? I was anticipating that probably none of them had. I mean, who of you as children fell out of a tree? No? That constitutes child abuse, I think, because you don't get a sense of who you are physically. I fell out of trees so many times as a child, and I'm grateful for that, because you have a sense of who you are physically. You get stretched. No wonder people are obsessed with things like sex and so on, because they've never explored other dimensions of being physical. I think this is, for instance, in Scandinavia, which has the best school systems in the world, as well as every year, you know, polling as the happiest countries in the world, they, in the nursery schools, and they have a higher percentage of teachers in relation to pupils anywhere else. But if children climb trees, that's fine. They fall out and injure themselves, that's fine. I think they're correct in that. And the forest is so important in a number of things. For instance, in Japan, if you're suffering from stress, it's coming to an end of the talk, if you're worried about it, your doctor will write you a prescription for what they call a forest shower. In other words, your boss has to give you a day off to walk in the forest, because you just walk nicely in the forest once and your stress goes. It's much better than pumping yourself full of Prozac and so on, and much cheaper. Also, starts in Germany, but now spread widely through Europe, is that schools are being situated in forests, because other animals can do most things better than us, but we can do a variety of things. Just the flexibility of the human body is enough to build our big brains. So they've found that children who don't go to school, but just run in forests, in these forests, actually are better developed intellectually than children who sat in a classroom. There's good research on this. So the forest school is very much, it's a spreading phenomenon. Many of them, you know, they just have a small shed, which is where you put your things and so on when you check in. And they don't even have toilets. The children use the forest. Now, this is an example of a city like this, a fantastic Norwegian city, hemmed in by mountains and forests. One of the problems of being hemmed in by mountains is that it does get polluted at times. If the air is polluted, it hangs there. So young children go in funiculars up into the forest schools. But if there's heavy pollution, all the children go into the forest. Doesn't matter what age you are. That gives you a better view of the forest in relation. And then what they also have is along the edge of the mountains, behind the forest and overlooking the city, are these huts. These ones you can see are designed by architects, and the architectural school has a project every year to build one. And what's interesting is that these huts, adults, they're free, and they're for children. Adults can only stay there if they're looking after children. And you can see from the entrance it's designed to be fun. And I think that's actually part of a great city. So nature in the city. The prime function of the city is to entice us to explore and stretch into who we would like to be and could be. So as well as the social encounters, intellectual central stimulation are the thrilling experiences offered by natural archetypes, in this case water and forest, but there are others. So these are the kinds of things a good city should have, is high places, hills from which you can look out and see things. London's full of those. Water in all forms, ponds, rivers, and so on, to explore and forests with wildlife, nature trails, etc. This is just a little distance from my house in central London, a forest, and for me that's a kind of fundamental right that we should all have. I mean, London is ringed by the green belt because part of English thinking was that just as you have a right to free education, free healthcare, free galleries, so you have a right to go for a walk in nature every day if you want. And this is a pond close by, which I just like because I always imagine dinosaurs in it. So the conclusion, we're in a process of immense change as the modern era ends. And that's going to change our relationship with everything, including nature. It won't simply be a resource to be used, but it'll be something much greater than that. Water is ever present in Bangladesh, but it's just a threat, or it's just a way of navigating. But it could be so many more things. And the thing about this is it wouldn't just make life more fun, it would for sure be better for the economy. So imagine if Dhaka was not known to the globe as a city of congestion and chaos, but a city of a chain of green lakes with many things to do and to enjoy. And young architects who want to start can have floating swimming pools, maybe they have floating restaurants and concert halls, all kinds of things you can do, and crowdfund them. And this would be, in urban design terms, you're always looking for the multiplier. Do minimum investment which has maximum knock-on effects. I would think this is the thing that should be invested in. And for young architects to go down this line. And I think that this era, when you look back on it and see what you've done to the lakes and the way that you've allowed developers to, you will feel really bad about what's going on at the moment. This is a crime against not only nature, it's a crime against Dhaka, and it's a crime against who we are as human beings. I think that's all I had to say, yeah.
Okay, we are good. If anyone has any question, you can raise your hand. Okay, sure.
Hi, Peter. It's fantastic talk, and we're blessed to hear some of the things that we should be hearing on a regular basis. And I would share one thing that I think lecture like this should be shared with some of the policymakers. The city is not in all parts responsibility of the young generations. It appears that the young generation will have bagload of problems to take care, but that also gives a possibility to look into the problems and come up with some solutions. Dhaka is certainly, from your talk, it is a very complex and dying city, but I would ask you to share, as you're ushering the young architects to come up with the unique ways of looking at the landscape here, what are the other things they also be thinking about in questioning the policies and ways the city has been laid out by the authority? The challenges lies there as well, and how one should get into this dialogue.
Policymakers have the power, but they're also resistant to using it. And a lot of Dhaka's problems look like they've been seduced by corporate or developing power. And perhaps I should say something else which made me think about the power of the young people. In England, the profile of practice, how people think of practice, changed profoundly after 2008. That young people, architects who were leaving, found that there was no work. And they also recognized that perhaps never were they going to get a client walk in. And so they took responsibility for themselves to just simply generate their own work. The example that I said, the floating swimming pool and crowd, that's just one of many. There are many. And one of the things I found very striking, Kazi and Marina were at a talk by some of these young people. What struck me very much is not only was the level of entrepreneurship and confidence, and I mean, this is actually much more difficult to do than conventional practice. These people work really hard they make a living, but not the living that, say, a Rogers or Foster does, and they never will get into that class. But that's not really their interest, because when you speak to them, their central driving thing is how can we contribute to culture? To the world, to the city. What is their legacy? And one of the things I was struck by after that talk is how much the star architects just look like sociopaths. Because all they're interested in is me, make me famous. Rem Koolhaas, Peter Eisenman, Zaha Hadid. They don't care a damn for people or for the like. And what I was struck by is how, with the modern period that we have with things like the internet and crowdfunding, it's amazing what you can do, how much you can take control of your own life. And not only that, you're not doing it for yourself, you're actually doing it for the betterment of the community and your city. I think there's lots and lots of ways you can do it. You need only look to see what are the problems in this area, and is there, very often the best way to solve something is not by addressing it direct. The traffic problems of Dhaka, yeah, better management would certainly help. But when you get the North-South movement squeezed by the military and so on, like, it's always going to be a problem. What you have to do is make enough money to pay for that. So what you do, you improve the quality of life as the roundabout way of solving the problem. And a lot of these young people are looking at like that. They're strategically very clever. They're not problem solvers. They're looking at ways to get around and make an impact. Now, I would say for young architects here, it's simply look at the local problems and see if you have an ingenious way of dealing with this and of making a contribution to improving life in Dhaka. And it's not very specific, I know, but...
Good evening, sir. I'm a student of architecture. Yes, sir. So we're very proud to have you among us. So my question is about the landscape that in Bangladesh, almost 1/3 of the country goes underwater during rainy season.
Yeah.
And our landscape is changes rapidly.
Yeah.
So some people see this, I mean the policymakers sometimes see this as a curse. They call it a disaster. So what's your point on that? Because as an architect, I believe that for thousands of years we have lived with flood. We have converted these forces of nature to our advantage. And should we think nature as a negative force, or should it be positive?
Actually, I had a slide to this effect, which I don't. Is that one of the things is that the modernity tended to look at things like water and floods and so on as the enemy. We have to look at these as an ally, nature, and see it in a different way. Certainly, you do have problems. The problems are not only, I think, those of the low-lying parts of Bangladesh, because many other parts of the world are suffering problems of floods they never had. Britain is having terrible flood problems, Germany's having terrible, and many of those are due to bad agriculture, because when there were trees and certain kinds of crops, they actually held the water. And also, I saw a study done by the British government, just a row of trees. This wouldn't work in Bangladesh because your water table is so, but I was astounded at the amount of water that one row of trees could take from the surface and put down into the earth. So this is like what I was saying, modernity saw single problems, but we're now left with the legacy of all the problems are complex. One thing relates to another, and the expression that's used is that they're wicked problems. Wicked problems are multi-causal, multi-solution. They are very, very difficult to solve. The whole thing of flooding is that, from the technical aspects and things, I don't know. I mean, if Bangladesh was going to sort that out, clearly calling a Dutch engineer, I don't know what percent, but half of the Netherlands is not. It's way below water level. I think Schiphol, the main airport, is 17 meters below sea level. They know how to deal with this. They could tell you what to do. I'm not the person. That's why I didn't really address technical issues. I think that we need to stop seeing things in isolation. I'm interested in the cultural and play potential of water. I think if we paid attention to that, it would also make it easier to solve the technical issue. But the one thing is that I don't think we're going to solve things by looking at this as the enemy. We have to look at it as an ally and how we can work with it rather than work against it. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's different to the age we're moving into than modern age. We're looking at always ways to work with. Again, sorry if it's not specific.
Sir, I have another question.
Yeah.
That I have seen in your presentation, that you have described the relationship with water, rivers and lakes, etc. But I had a question that you have never described the relationship with water that comes from above, I mean the rain. So can you tell something about about rain? How do you relate in urban life?
To rain?
Yes, sir.
Rain's great. I don't know what the problem is. As long as you just don't put it straight down the drain, you find some. One of the things which I didn't talk about, again, this technical issue, is that water is part of a whole water cycle. The Amazon is the last really important biotic pump, it's called. Bangladesh would have been one of those. What they're very important is that they take water and pump it up into the sky, which not only it cools the earth, it provides the rain, but it actually also drives the currents of air going around the planet. And one of the things that's threatening the planet is that those currents are getting close to where they're going to stop. I mean, Bangladesh is gone, Malaysia is losing its forests very quickly, and once more has gone from the Amazon, we're in serious trouble. Again, I'm not answering your question, but the whole thing of rain, it's not just rain, it's the whole water cycle has to be looked at and recovered again. It's very, very important. I would say the thing about rain is to, again, treat it as an ally, not something terrible, and something to be defended against. And I don't have anything more concrete to say, really.
Thank you, sir.
We'll take one more question, if anybody has any.
Oh, is this Ileana?
Yes, hi.
Oh,
Hello.
I've only just recognized
maybe
you.
30 years since
Yes,
I
yes,
saw
yes.
you first.
Sorry. I thought.
Delightful. Thank you so much for your talk. It was really great listening. And I have one question. First of all, I want to say how much I appreciate that great comment about crowdfunding young architects projects.
Yeah.
My question is that whether you have looked into the work of a Austrian water expert of the 1930s called Victor Schauberger, who really studied water in the way it works naturally, and whether you know of anyone who is applying that kind of logic to solutions, for instance, for unsilting rivers, and creating ways to design for water.
This is a, if I'm right, he's looking at engineering water so that it moves and aerates, and consequently the water is live in his sense. Is that right?
Yes, and I seem to remember in one of his books they described some kind of scoop-shaped elements.
Yeah. Okay. I've got them.
But I don't know anyone who deals with it. So
no, there are quite a lot of people, but
you
unfortunately at a small scale in terms of within a single garden and so. And it's been very much taken up by the anthroposophists and the Steiner people. So it's known, but it's a kind of minority interest. And the problem is that the people who've taken him up, while I think they have many interesting ideas, are also seen by the mainstream culture as rather cranky, which doesn't help his ideas get disseminated and to be taken up. From what I know about the ideas, they seem to have a lot of validity. And this is like what I was showing with the bioremediation, how plants and so on can purify water. This is another dimension of that. And sometimes some of those pools actually use those scoop shaped, I can't remember, flow forms, I think they're called, to aerate and invigorate the water. But that's all I know about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter Buchanan, for an excellent talk. And thanks for being an amazing audience. Keep coming to Bengal Institute's lecture, and remember the date, November 15th. We will announce soon about it. Thank you.